I am so excited today to have Luke Magnetti on the podcast. Luke's a 19-year-old entrepreneur and marketer who has worked on and led various marketing projects. He's helped in multiple ways with his mom's dog grooming business, What the Floof, as it has seen drastic growth over the past few years. Luke's currently developing his own SaaS company tailored for the dog grooming industry. He also hosts a podcast, The Magnetic Effect, where he and guests share insights on business, life, and personal growth. Beyond entrepreneurship, Luke is a Christian, a traveler, and a lifelong learner, committed to self-improvement every day. Luke, I'm thrilled you're here. Thanks so much for being on the show.
No problem. Thank you so much for inviting me on and having me on.
Welcome to Catalytic Leadership, the podcast designed to help leaders intentionally grow and thrive. Here is your host, author, and leadership and executive coach, Dr. William Attaway.
I'd love to start, Luke, with you sharing a little bit of your story with our listeners, particularly around your journey and your development as a leader.
Yeah, 100%. So, I grew up in a, entrepreneurial household. My mom has owned a business since she's 25, around that age. I don't know specifically, but, my whole life I grew up with that. And as I matured, it was, the more and more I matured and got older, the more and more I got involved within what was happening within the business, within conversations, within work, within those things. And so I got to see from a very young age, um, I guess, leadership and how she's doing it, how she's being successful with it, and as well to develop my own style of leadership and to grow into specific roles. So, I've always been a natural leader as well for myself. Maybe I got that from her, but I've loved just every part of it. I loved dealing with people. I loved leading people, encouraging them, making sure that everybody feels heard, seen, that they're impacting whatever the project or whatever the business is. And, I've done that in multiple different ways through books, through, one of my favorite ways is just implementation, honestly. So implementing, getting inside of businesses and hearing stories. And so, I have a lot to learn. I'm still in, the very early stages of my entrepreneurship career and definitely my leadership career. And I know that there's a lot of mistakes that are going to happen that hopefully I'll learn from. But I feel like I've developed a really good foundation so far.
I love that. And I think talking to somebody of your age is going to be incredibly inspiring and encouraging for a lot of the folks listening who may be your age or a little bit older, or they may be significantly older. And yet I believe you can learn from anybody. And I think your perspective today is going to be incredibly helpful. Here's what I want to dive into. I want to talk about some of the stuff that you've done first with your mom's business ventures, right? You described yourself as having the perspective of a hole puncher. I would love for you to talk a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, 100%. So the way that I describe that as a hole puncher is I am, how you have some people in some businesses that are almost removed from the emotional factor, or it's
Mhm.
almost like a marketing agency where it's like you have somebody running the ads that is removed from the emotional side of the business so that they
Sure.
can make more logical decisions. I feel like in some ways I'm kind of like that for her. Um, Even though we're still, she's my mom, even though I'm kind of like, I guess, emotionally attached to her in that ways, I'm not necessarily emotionally attached to the business. And so she has an idea. She goes, "Hey, I have this situation I'm dealing with." She'll always, bring it to me for my learning purposes. And also, she just likes to share with me and get my thoughts on that. And so I'm always the one where I'm like, "Okay, awesome. I love this. But here are the things that I see that could potentially happen, that could go wrong, that could go well." And so I think that helps her, especially limit the areas of where things could go wrong. Of like, hey, I'm dealing with this situation. Maybe it's a leadership problem. Maybe it's just a systems problem. How
Hmm.
can we fix this? Or here's an idea that I have to fix this. What are some of the holes that you see that people or things may go wrong in? And so just being able to point those out and being like, hey, maybe you should, pay attention to this area or make sure that this person knows this information or set up these meetings so that everybody is on the same page. I think that goes, a long, long way, just because, you know, as visionaries, I've seen it. I'm as well kind of a visionary. It's so easy to just get super caught up within the idea that it's harder to think of every single aspect of the things that can go wrong, of the things that
Mm.
can go right. A lot of people as well may be super, super positive and they can only see the things that can go right, especially when it's our own ideas. And um, so yeah, that's kind of a little bit of that role of just an explanation of kind of the hole puncher and poking holes within the ideas so that they become a little bit more solid.
I can imagine that, having a more detached, a hole puncher perspective is always welcomed. It's always valued, and people love it when you start poking holes, right?
Yes and no. I mean, there's a lot of times where, you know, our relationship is very, I I guess we'll say my mindset and my personality is very much, here's what I'll tell you what I think. I
Yeah.
could be completely wrong. I don't want to claim that I know better than her or claim that I know better than anybody, because I don't really know. At the end of the day, I'm a young kid and I make mistakes, and everybody makes mistakes, but especially at this age, just from lack of experience. And so, there's a lot of times where it's very good, where it's like, okay, yeah, I see that perspective, or I see this perspective. There are disagreements sometimes where I'm like, I think this is going to happen. She thinks that's going to happen. But at the end of the day, like, it becomes this thing where it's a mutual disagreement, and she moves forward, and if it works, awesome. If it doesn't, then it's almost like, all right, not like I told you so. I'm not going to be like that, but also at the same time, like, we'll fix it.
That humility of not just trying to force your own way, of not just being so certain that this has to be, and if you don't do this, then you're wrong. The humility that you approach that with, I think, is incredibly valuable. Has that always been the case?
I think it depends on the situation.
Hmm.
I think that as I grow more older, that's just who I want to become. It
Hmm.
aligns with my values. I think sometimes I can be very stern or very, um, what's the word? I forget the word for it, but very stubborn in a way.
Hmm.
Sometimes if there's things where I have an opinion on, then my natural instinct is to kind of run with that and to just take that. But I've learned more and more as I grow up just to be more humble. And, one of the things that I've learned as well within leadership is that there's so many different ways to do something. So,
Hmm.
there's not just one way to get something done, or there's not just one way to do something right. And so, obviously, I'm going to think what I think is right, and
Hmm.
somebody else is going to think what they think is right. At the end of the day, they might both just be right. And, one of my favorite people to kind of teach on leadership is Jocko Willink. And we can talk about kind of his book and how that's impacted me a little bit. But he's super involved in just like, even if a plan isn't at 100%, if
Yeah.
it's that person's plan, let them run with it. Don't start touching it. Don't start tweaking it, because, once you start going in there and you start letting your ego get involved, you might be able to improve it. But then that implementation is going to go down. And as well,
Hmm.
you might be wrong as well. And so I think just coming at situations with humility, being humble, realizing like, hey, this is all just a calculated guess at the end of the day. And we're going to work as a team to solve whatever problem we need to solve.
I think one of two things is often the case when it comes to young leaders. There's either a very strong certainty that I'm right because we haven't learned the value of humility, or there is an overwhelming sense of uncertainty because I'm not old enough. I don't have the education. I don't have the experience. And I think either one of those can be a trap
Mm-hmm.
that anybody can fall into. Have you struggled with the latter? Have you struggled with feeling like, gosh, should I be in this room? Should I be in this conversation? I mean, as you step into the SaaS company, especially, like you're stepping into a whole different ballgame. Do you ever wonder, like, wow, am I out of place?
Every single day. uh, yeah, every single day. And I'm getting better at realizing that for some people, I think for a majority of people, it's a struggle of kind of like, even if you are a quote unquote confident person, um,
Hmm.
it's just struggles that everybody has. And so I've learned to deal with them and to accept them and to kind of embrace them. But yes,
Mm.
every single day. And I've been in, events and rooms. I've talked to people. I've, even involved with things with my mom's business where I feel like, what the heck am I doing here? Like, what's this person going to think about me, saying this, or what's this person going to think of me saying this, or something like that. But I've learned of like, when I actually put myself in those situations, it's almost like the spotlight effect, where you
Mm.
think everybody's thinking about you and you think everybody thinks that you shouldn't be there when
Mm.
everybody else is probably feeling almost the same exact thing.
Yes.
And so um, I think that when other people in the room kind of encourage you and give you encouragement and kind of prove to you that you maybe do belong in that room, then that helps a ton. But I think that you just need to learn how to deal with those things sometimes and learn that, you know, sometimes you're not going to feel like you know where you're going. Sometimes you're going to feel like you don't belong in a room, but it's completely normal, and at the end of the day, if you're alive and you're healthy and you're all good, then there'll be another day tomorrow to continue to move forward. And as well, like to add on to this as well, sometimes I think there are rooms or conversations that maybe I shouldn't have been in. Maybe I wasn't supposed to be in them, but it's all a learning experience. Even if I'm someplace where maybe I'm not to the level that I should be to be there, just by me being there, I'm going to grow and it's going to help accelerate that growth. And so, even if you feel uncomfortable, even if maybe you think that it's embarrassing or something, I don't know, there's a ton of emotion. Just try to, get as far forward as you can, and don't let those feelings dictate too much of the decision process and how you lead.
I love that perspective. You and I met at the Commitment Summit down in Mexico earlier this year, a conference. And as I was talking with you, I was really impressed because that's the perspective I caught from you in our conversation. And I thought, wow, that is such a healthy place to be. It's not this overconfidence or arrogance. Of course I belong here.
Hmm.
And it's not this, oh, I don't know why I'm here. I don't have a place here. It's a comfortable humility. And that is really strong in you. And I just want to call that out and encourage you in that, because in our conversations, that's one thing I have really admired. And I think that is only something that's going to grow in the years to come.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, I think it's just that mindset of like exactly like you said, of like, honestly, there's a lot of times where I may feel one way, but
Yeah.
the reality is a different way. And I think I've been in those situations enough where I'm like, okay, I can't really, like, I'm just going to give this a good positive mindset and I'm going to try to learn and grow as much as I possibly can out of this. And I'm not going to focus too much on, am I supposed to be here? Am I, I guess, am I a good enough leader to be here? Or am I a good enough entrepreneur? Or am I just good enough in general to be here? I feel like that is a very bad trap that you can really get yourself in, and it is very negative towards your growth. So
100%. And the reality is that if we're honest, every entrepreneur faces uncertainty. Every one of us. We all deal with this at some point, at some level. And it's not like we vanquish it and once and for all we never see it again, because as we approach new levels, we find new challenges. And
mhm,
that creates more uncertainty as we look into the future and we can't quite see exactly how this is going to play out. And learning how to be resilient in the midst of the uncertainty, how to continue to press forward, is the work of a lifetime. And I've not yet met the entrepreneur in almost 30 years of working with leaders. I've not yet met the entrepreneur that says, yeah, I don't really deal with that ever anymore. You know, it's something that we all have to learn to deal with and push through those limitations, push
yeah,
through that uncertainty. You bring an external perspective with your mom's business. We talked about this, the more detached, the outside perspective, the hole puncher. You're able to bring that and provide that feedback to what she's doing, to her business. When it comes to this new SaaS business that you're launching, right? You're now in the visionary role, right? This is going to be your baby.
Yeah.
What are some things that you are learning as you are preparing to execute and launch this vision?
A lot. And every single day, every single time I talk to somebody, they're like, "Hey, what's new?" I'm like, "A ton," because there's a lot that you're learning, a lot that is just completely new, and it's not
Yeah.
even. I think it's a little bit of skill growing, but it's also a lot of just differentiating your habits and creating new habits and kind of creating new thought processes. And so, especially when you're in, for me currently in the startup kind of phase of the SaaS, I have to serve a little bit as everybody. I don't necessarily have the support of employees or a COO or CEO or whatever role that I would want to be in. I kind of have to be a little bit of everybody. And so that takes a little bit of a learning curve because now you don't have the, I guess, the luxury to push roles and push projects that you don't necessarily want to do to somebody else.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
kind of have to take that all on. And actually, Ryan Dice said something. I saw something that he said the other day that was super, super powerful and like hit me because he was like, a lot of people get into entrepreneurship or get into leadership roles because they don't want to do specific things. And at the end of the day, you can get to a certain point where most of the work that you do is enjoyable and things that you enjoy, but it's just not reality to expect that you're never going to have to do anything that you don't like to do. He's like, if when my kid was born, I told my wife, I don't really like changing diapers. I think that's kind of like your role. He's like, I would get smacked. And I was like, wow, like it's so obvious, but also at the same time, I was like, that is so true. And I kind of need to embrace that a little bit more and just not be in this like stubborn role of being like, oh, I'm just a visionary, or I'm just like, oh, I just do this part, but being like, okay, I'm either going to be a little bit of everything and grow this thing, or I'm going to be stuck here,
I think that's incredibly wise. One of the things that I often say when I'm coaching teams or leaders is that if you're able to spend about 75 or 80% of your time in your zone of genius, that's a massive win.
Mhm.
Nobody spends 100. You're going to have that other 20, 25%. You just are. It's part of it, particularly if you're the owner, right?
Yeah.
There's stuff that only you can do. There's perspectives and landscapes that only you can see. Nobody can do that for you.
Yeah.
And I think that's incredibly wise, particularly this early in your journey.
100%. And I think, I'd be interested to know what you think about this a little bit, but I think that social media has kind of portrayed this image of entrepreneurship being more sexy than it is,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
leadership more sexy than it is. When
Yeah.
the reality is that, there's just a lot of things that go wrong or a lot of things that happen. And as the leader, as the COO, as the CEO, whatever your role may be, sometimes you have to fix those things and take ownership of them and get them done, and that's just the reality of business. Honestly, it's the reality of life.
Yeah.
But it's a lot harder from my experience, be your own boss and tell yourself what you have to do instead of somebody else telling you what you have to do. There's that lack of, I guess, accountability, because
Yeah.
you're fine letting yourself down sometimes, even though it's like the most important thing to not let yourself down. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're the hardest person you'll ever lead. And I think that's true no matter where you are in the journey. And for business owners, they're like, I don't have a boss. Finally, nobody tell me what to do. Well, the reality is you've got to manage and lead yourself.
Yeah.
And that's way harder than leading other people because most of us talk to ourselves like we would never talk to someone else.
Yep.
Our self-talk is unhealthy. It is littered with negative perspectives, with negative outlooks. And unless we're careful of that and the soundtrack that we're building, like John Acuff writes about, unless we're careful there and mindful of that, we will find ourselves and our leadership littered with broken soundtracks. We will find our leadership not only of other people, but also of ourselves affected in a very powerfully negative way.
100%.
I think one of the pieces you said too is how leadership is often portrayed, particularly on social media. We see highlight reels. We see other people's highlight reels, and that's great. And everybody's got the highlight reels of what's going right. The reality is leadership is not always just a highlight reel. Most often, I find leadership is moving toward the messes. That's what leaders have to do because other people aren't going to do that. We move toward the mess. We don't run away.
Yeah.
We move toward the fire. And our job is to solve the problem and to get on the solution side. And like you say, that's not always sexy. It's not always fun. It's not always enjoyable. But I believe that's part of what being a leader means.
Yeah. And I've come across some people that do a good job at being vulnerable and putting out, I guess, real content of things that they're dealing with. But it's hard to put yourself out there and to say like, oh, here's my failures,
Right.
And a lot of the times that's not the stuff that goes viral, like the things that are the successes are the things that go viral. So I think it's just, you don't see that as much, even if people are posting that. But I mean, it's the reality when, you have a mass exit of team members or, you're running a small team and even just a couple people leave and it's like, crap, that's 50% of my company, and now you have, holes to fill or, team members that are being mean or there's so many different opportunities that I think any leader could probably jump into and tell them and people would be like, what the heck is wrong with people? But that's just the reality. But I think that there is an enjoyment factor for some people. For me, there's a part of me that does enjoy that chaos. Maybe not in the moment so much, but there's a part of me that really enjoys conquering a really bad situation and coming out the other side feeling like I did everything that I could have or everything was handled on our side the way that it should have been. And maybe the other person didn't handle it well. But I did, the company did, whatever, whoever is making the decisions, they did everything that they could have done in a way that aligns with our values. I really find a lot of enjoyment within those things.
I think it's a wonderful place to be when you say, I made the best decision I could with the information I had at the time.
Yeah.
I think if you can say that, you can sleep well. The reality is you're not going to know all the different moving parts. You're not going to be able to foresee all the pieces that are moving around the board. You do the best you can with the information you have at the time. And then you learn from it. You evaluate and you say, okay, what went right? What didn't? What would I do different next time? And as you process that learning, it's then available to you going forward the next time you're in a similar situation. I believe that's how leaders develop and grow. And as they pass those learnings on to other people, it only cements those lessons in their own life.
Yeah. And it's even too what you said, just learning from it. I think that's so important and not getting caught up because the reality is that sometimes we make bad decisions. Like every single leader, no matter
100% of us.
Yeah. It could be a brand new leader like me or somebody that has run a business for 30, 40 years like my mom. There's just going to be times where you mess up. But the most important thing I think from that, like you said, is just learning from it and not getting so wrapped up over it. I see a lot of people, they get so wrapped up over it and it tears them down when it's like, okay, I should have done it differently, but I can't control that anymore. I'm going to learn it. I'm going to make it right. And I'm not going to do that again. That's all that you can do. And I think that's probably the most powerful way that you can handle those situations.
100%. So let me ask you, look, how do you stay on top of your game as a leader? How do you level up with the new leadership skills that your company's going to need you to have in the next 3, 4, 5 years?
Well, first of all, I think one of my favorite ways is just through personal growth and through, leadership growth as well, through books and through videos and things like that. But I think that personal growth and who you are as a leader are very close together. Who you are as a person is going to reflect kind of who you are as a leader as well. And so I think that for me, the more that I grow, the more that I mature, the more that I work on myself personally, the better I'm able to handle situations, the better I'm able to handle conflict or
Hmm.
people that maybe aren't super kind or people that have objections or things like that. You don't crumble under pressure as easily and you're able to stay calm and kind of think clearly. So those are the
Good.
things that, would be the first things that I like to do. But as well as just, I think that talking to your team members, um, being super involved within, I guess, just things that are going on within the company is super valuable. And making sure that you don't get too kind of out of touch with
Hmm.
how your team members are feeling and making sure that, their voice is just as important as yours, even though you may
Hmm.
be the leader, to let them tell you and give you feedback on how everything is going internally. I
That's good.
think that a lot of people see even publicly, like companies that are ginormous and everything looks great from the outside, or even like the executives thinks that everything is great, but then everybody on the inside is like, this is a mess. Like, I don't want to work for this place or this is going on. Some people don't care, but I think at the end of the day, a lot of people, especially the people watching your show, probably want to create a team, an environment that people love to work in. And so I think that that is a very big part of my growth is to
Hmm.
just not get too far detached and to just make sure that I'm learning from the people within my team and making
Hmm.
sure that they feel like I'm also leading this ship correctly.
And I think that teachable spirit is what makes leaders truly catalytic. I really do. I think that's the differentiator when you realize you can learn not just from other people outside your organization, but from your team. When
Yeah.
you model that teachable spirit, that becomes a part of your culture, your DNA in your
Yeah.
business. And that's what takes you far, in my
Hmm.
experience. You talked about books and different ways that you learn. Is there a book that has made a big difference in your journey so far that you would recommend to everybody listening? Hey, if you haven't read this, check it out.
Yeah, there's quite a few. One that comes to my mind for leadership specifically is a book called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willing. If you haven't read it out there, go and check it out. It was honestly one of the first leadership books that I've read, but it was incredible just because I think that not only for personal growth, but for leadership growth as well, it really teaches you to take ownership over situations because at the end of the day, you are the leader and it
Yeah.
goes through the different kind of scenarios of how to solve problems and how not to solve problems. Um, but that was incredibly powerful and it helped me
Mm,
personally just in my life stop pointing fingers at people and just
mm,
realize, hey, like I'm in control of this company, I'm in control of this situation, and I need to take ownership if something goes wrong, even if it may not be necessarily 100% my fault. Sometimes it's easier to just be like, okay, I'll take ownership, we're going to fix this. So
yes.
those books, and honestly for personal growth, I'll always recommend Viktor Frankl's books. I don't know if you've
Mm,
read Man's Search
yes.
for Meaning and Saying Yes to Life in Spite of Everything. Those have
Yeah.
just been super, super influential in my life in just the personal growth side.
So good. Look, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I appreciate you sharing so generously and so transparently from your journey. I know folks are going to want to stay connected to you and continue to learn from you and more about what you're doing. What is the best way for them to do that?
They can go over to lukemagnetti.com and all my links will be there. So they can check out my Instagram, my Facebook, my LinkedIn, all of the links. My YouTube will also be up there in the podcast very, very soon. Actually, maybe around when this podcast launches, I'm going to be kind of starting a series of documenting my journey and trying to aim to show the ups and downs of what not a lot of people show and kind of just be real about just every single struggle that entrepreneurs go through,
Hmm.
and maybe that will help people out there. I hope it does, but we'll see. So you can go over there and check that out. I'll probably have that launched by then. um, and yeah, thank you so much for inviting me and having me on. I really hope that for anybody out there this was of value, and thank you so much.
Thanks for joining me for this episode today. As we wrap up, I'd love for you to do two things. First, subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. And if you find value here, I'd love it if you would rate it and review it. That really does make a difference in helping other people to discover this podcast. Second, if you don't have a copy of my newest book, Catalytic Leadership, I'd love to put a copy in your hands. If you go to catalyticleadershipbook.com, you can get a copy for free. Just pay the shipping so I can get it to you, and we'll get one right out. My goal is to put this into the hands of as many leaders as possible. This book captures principles that I've learned in 20 plus years of coaching leaders in the entrepreneurial space, in business, government, nonprofits, education, and the local church. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn to keep up with what I'm currently learning and thinking about. And if you're ready to take a next step with a coach to help you intentionally grow and thrive as a leader, I'd be honored to help you. Just go to catalyticleadership.net to book a call with me. Stay tuned for our next episode next week. Until then, as always, leaders, choose to be catalytic.
Thanks for listening to Catalytic Leadership with Dr. William Attaway. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss the next episode. Want more? Go to catalyticleadership.net.